So as always, I want to thank our supporters at Con Edison, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council, the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul and the New York State Legislature. I hope they pass a budget that includes sufficient arts funding. The National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Community Trust, the Howard Gilman Foundation, and so many others for making programs like this possible.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Ooh, can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you all so much for coming. I've been really looking forward to this conversation with all of these fantastic artists. As Lisa mentioned, they're all representing widely varying public art practices, so I'm really interested to hear everyone's varied perspectives on the subject. So I thought we'd just get into it with introductions. I'm Shannon Lee, as Lisa mentioned. I'm the editor of A4's magazine, The AMP, and I'm going to pass on the mic to Bahar, and we can just go down if you all just want to introduce yourselves, your pronouns, and just state briefly, describe a little bit about your practices.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Bahar. My pronoun, I believe in fluidity, so, anything really. But as of now, she, her is fine. Usually we are very accustomed, especially in America, to say like, I'm a multidisciplinary artist or whatever we call it. Culturally, I haven't brought up to call ourselves artists. It's a really big name, so every time that I want to introduce myself, I have a little bit hard time to say I'm an artist. But I paint, I make things, and also I make some videos, and I love to work with community and in a public platform, so, and other things that I'm hoping that we share during our talk.
Hi everyone, my name is Clae Lu. I use they, them pronouns. Currently, I'm sort of focused on guzheng performance, which is Chinese zither, and sort of exploring music and sound work in that way. But I also paint, I also draw. I also call myself a cultural worker because I think that the things that we do are also creating culture. And yeah, I'm a Queens native.
Hey everyone, I'm Amanda Phingbodhipakkiya. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and that's me.
Culprit.
It's having its rebellion. Exactly. I like to think of my practice as invoking joy and belonging and redefining inherited narratives. Oh no, having a bad day. So I also paint, I create textiles, sculpture, rituals, but what I hope people get from encountering my work in the wild is that they feel like it's a warm embrace, that it is an embrace that is spacious enough to hold anything that they're carrying or processing, and an embrace that just like very gently lifts them up.
Hi, I'm Ayung. I use she, her pronouns. I work primarily in performance-based film, and recently, sort of within the last year, I've also started to explore live performance, which has been really exciting, being able to sort of connect with people in real time in a way that isn't really feasible through documentation. And a lot of my work centers around reimagined Korean ancestral spiritual practices that are sort of interpreted and readapted through a diasporic lens, exploring themes of generational trauma, loss, healing, care, and migrant communities.
Hello, I'm just waiting for that mic to start going off, so hopefully it won't. My name is Betty Yu, and I use she, her pronouns. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. been living in New York City my whole life. I am a multimedia artist. I started off in film and photography, but I sort of mix a little bit of everything, so installation and collage, photography, new media, interactive media as well. You know, a lot of my work addresses issues of gentrification, labor rights, immigrant rights, incarceration, issues that really impact the Chinatown community as well. I'm also a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, and we just had a show that closed last weekend, I believe it was, at Pace University Gallery, where it was called Degentrification Archives, and it was archives of our last 7 years in our collaboration with CAB, which is communities organizing, I always forget that. CAB used to stand for Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence, but now it's communities organizing Asian communities.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having a brain fart. I'm also a new mother to a 1-year-old, so excuse me. I'm like lacking in sleep and everything. But CAB's Chinatown Tenants Union, we've had a 7-year collaboration with them, and we work with the tenants mainly through public projections to sort of amplify their voices around landlord harassment, anti-displacement messages, and really kind of amplify their message of resilience and resistance. Yeah, I know you'll be hearing about us a little bit more, but that is my most recent public art project, I guess, is with them.
Amazing. And actually, Betty, maybe you can hold on to that mic, and we'll just sort of ping pong the microphone back and forth since we have the one.
I don't know, is there anyone I can talk to so that it seems to like start?
Let's see. You want to maybe just kick it over? Yeah.
When they face each other, they seem to start getting a little crazy.
It's like those fighting. Great. Thank you so much for those wonderful intros. I would love to know what brought each of you to public art in your practices. Betty, if you'd like to start.
So I guess what brought me to public art, I still am getting used to the idea of, well, I've been an artist for a long time, but you know, creating public art and, for the masses, I guess, is something that is kind of newer. So I started out in filmmaking and photography, and I think it was really collaborating with tenants in Chinatown Art Brigade that really helped me think about public art in a really new way, because not only we all know the white box gallery and museums, they're inaccessible, right? And oftentimes institutional politics play a role in who can show there, and there's like racism and sexism and all of that stuff, right? That that goes into the politics of these institutions. But it really kind of was a grassroots effort working with CAB and the Chinatown Tenants Union as Chinatown Art Brigade. I mean, from the get-go, we were really clear that we wanted to use this public art project to reach other tenants, so that other tenants who maybe didn't know about CAB's history, 37-year history, particularly around organizing for tenant rights, could actually get involved. And so it became a really natural, essential part of their organizing work, their cultural organizing. And I think that public art in general should really meet the needs, right, of the local community. And I think that, there's all these possibilities now as we're like looking at monuments and rethinking monuments and all of that, to really think about who are we trying to reach and because public art can be very like a catalyst for change, or it can be something that is complacent, or it can be something that honestly has been put in place to further gentrify a neighborhood, or to further increase the real estate value, or is the Trojan horse in place while folks in Chinatown get pushed out and then something else comes in. So I really think that there is a real opportunity to really make public art a grassroots effort that really meets the immediate needs of folks. And so another project I'll just mention really quick is with the High Line a couple years ago, and I really grappled with it, because the High Line is a gentrifying force of Chelsea. We all know what the space was, right? When it was the meatpacking district, 20 years ago, it was like a queer-friendly space. It was a space for sex workers. It was a space for art, like underground art, like political art. And so the Whitney Museum and High Line was part of sanitizing, quote unquote, and unblighting the neighborhood or something. So it was really I grappled with that. But a few other artists who were also commissioned were also grantees of the Laundromat Project, Artists of Color organization. And just to sum up that, I use it as an opportunity to uplift the role actually that the High Line played in gentrifying the neighborhood. And so I interviewed a whole bunch of people who used to work around the High Line, folks who are nannies to really rich, wealthy, yuppie families around the High Line, and they talked about what it was like before. Some of them knew what it was like before, and going to the High Line, and the racism and the classism and all this. So, and garment workers too in the garment district as well, near the High Line. So I just try to use it as an opportunity to highlight stories, and they became these street signs that are still up actually along the High Line. But yeah, it's one of those things where you have to think it through, like who is this reaching? What is the purpose? For me, at least, that's really, really important, and that makes sure that the social justice message and theme is really woven throughout the work that I do. So yeah, I don't know. That's a long answer. Sorry. No, that was great.
Amazing. Yeah, so public art is kind of something that is sort of new to my practice. I was always kind of working more within film and private performance contexts. I had an opportunity last year as part of an exhibition called Garmenting at MAD, where I was invited to present my first live performance, and that's kind of what opened up this new chapter. And it was this really beautiful and intimate experience where it felt like a shared moment and not so much like an audience spectator watching in, but really being able to like directly engage. We had a lot of moments where we were performing a readaptation of a mourning ritual called Shikimgut, which kind of is where you cleanse spirits of the deceased and help them on to the afterlife. And we offered like handmade ornaments and jewelry, and we handed it out to people, and they kind of took it home. It was sort of this beautiful exchange. And then sort of later, we had a performance that is an ongoing project called Dreams, where we have invited people to donate their dreams to us in written form, and then it sort of in exchange we'll send them a small hand-thrown porcelain bottle. And it created a lot of, a lot of the dreams opened up this space of healing where a lot of people were kind of experiencing a lot of like mourning and grief dreams, which also felt very topical because it was the project was really going on throughout the pandemic. And Dreams was just a way for people to really kind of talk about very like openly and safely experiences that they've kind of been holding inside. And I feel like that's really been a guiding force in the way that I think about performance, of creating this sort of experience of connection and where people can kind of like share their stories and share their experiences.
So much of what Betty and Ayoung have shared just resonates certainly so deeply with me, but I guess to specifically pinpoint what drew me to public art is its incredible accessibility. You know, I think it's such a beautiful opportunity for an artist to be able to offer art to everyday people in a way that melds seamlessly in their lives. You know, you're walking your dog, you are getting a bagel, you are just on public transit, and you are maybe challenged or delighted or inspired by something that you see that you didn't have to go out of your way to encounter. You know, it takes the burden off of everyday people to go to a specific institution, to go to a specific gallery, to really immerse in art. And that's really what drew me to it in the first place. But I also found that, you know, creating work at such a large scale, you know, sort of thinking about a city as a canvas was a powerful way to make a statement. You know, it's like if you're encountering something on the side of a building, it's kind of hard to ignore, especially if it's kind of something with a provocative message. But beyond that, if you continue to see the art everywhere around your city and your neighborhood, in different neighborhoods, wherever you go, it is just this constant reminder that, you know, this is something that you should pay attention to. This is important. And maybe it's something that if you weren't thinking about it before, perhaps it's something to interrogate. But I think, as I've, created lots of murals in different cities across the country and internationally, I've been, thinking more and more about how public art is certainly meant to place make, but it's also about, as Ayoung mentioned, moment making. This sort of like transformation that we can go through together through some sort of guided experience. So I've been introducing a lot of rituals into my work. There's certainly this sculptural monument to kind of ground us in this space, but it's very much about, how do I create a space to help people lay down their burdens, to process, whatever they're carrying. Certainly we have so much to process because we have endured so much. But, yeah.
Okay. Wow. So for me, I think public art sort of came in a way that I wasn't expecting. I did a lot of peer organizing in school as an undergrad. And as art students, a lot of what our organizing looked like was taking over exhibition spaces, and we were organizing to change the structure of the school's curriculum. So it was a way to meet our audience where they're at, our peers, the staff, other students outside of our department. That's sort of where it started. I think only after, when I was seeking that out sort of in the, so to speak, real world, outside of the bubble of school, did I realize that that was a form of public art. And I kept sort of chasing that. And for many years, I worked at the WOW Project, creating and helping artists build curriculums of public programming to meet their audience where they're at. So often that would be local Chinatown residents. It would be folks who were interested in the history of Chinatown. And that was really interesting too, because it was all through arts as education. And now that sort of I'm focusing on my own, maybe like arts practice, through music, through sharing traditional Chinese music through the guzheng, it's become maybe more, so to speak, on the like studio art performance side. But I think public art is really interesting because it is, like everyone has been saying, it meets the audience where they're at. And I think that's really important because, yeah, museums, galleries, they're all sort of these elitist spaces where people have to go out of their way to interact with art. And public art is a really beautiful way to meet people where they're at, meet communities, people who don't feel like they can be part of art with a capital A, and see it as something that's part of their everyday lives. So being able to play music, especially through this instrument that is, from my perspective, quite traditional and is still a metaphor for my relationship with my own heritage, it's been really beautiful to not have to verbally explain what is happening, but just share the music that I have learned, and be able to have people come up to me and be like, I have never seen this instrument in real life. I often only ever see it in museums or in TV shows and movies. And to hear songs, I also play pop songs along with folk songs and my own music now. It's really wonderful to be able to share that and allow people to reconnect with their heritage or with something that they can finally see happen in real life. Yeah.
Thank you. It's fascinating how much overlaps and things that I resonate, and I'm hoping that we can just tap into many things together. But particularly, like answering your question, that how public art started for me, I think because I was a filmmaker too and a painter, and I was performing only on my films, not like for public. But when I came to America, I have a feeling that because I came as an adult, and all of a sudden I got to this place that they couldn't pronounce my name. They didn't know where I come from. They wanted to know I come from, but then they couldn't pronounce the country. And even when they would just like get that where I come from, then they didn't like to know then. So I was like in a very like kind of a strange uncomfortable and awkward position with who I am, and it was very new to me because for my whole life I was proud of who I am and the family that I grew up and the culture and the rich ritualistic cultured place that I come from, and then I didn't have the language to articulate all of this for anybody, and I was at that time, I was in Virginia, in Atlanta, in different places that it was even like harder to just say like, I have something to share too, but I don't have like maybe like the words that you know or you resonate with. So in a very organic way and in a very gradual process, and through a feeling that I had as a longing for fresh bread, that I couldn't find in any bakeries in Virginia, I started to just get like really interested and curious that what these people eat if they don't go to bakeries every day, because we go to bakery every day. So I started to know them. And then I realized that in this process of learning, things just happening. And I just offered the bread to some people, and then I found like, oh, that's a power. I can just host some gatherings, and people can come, and we can talk about bread, and that actually breaks the ice, and they don't know that much like where I come from. Or if they know, they don't feel that much threatened because it's just like we're having bread together. So that was my first public art that I started like deeply research about Wonder Bread in America and all the culture of industrial aspect of bread and the culture of bread, particularly it was just very fascinating for me that America, I think, is the only country that advertise for bread, because bread doesn't need any advertisement, as we know. And then not only advertised for bread, and I actually obsessively just gathered all the archivals that I could just find about Wonder Bread, that how like really like they invested on that. But also like then in the contrary, we have like this culture in America that carbohydrate and bread is like evil. So this kind of contradiction also was like very interesting to me. So I started this public art that it was all about bread, and to give this kind of like duality and paradoxical relationship with bread that everybody has got. But also I was just more interested to see how we can get together and just have like make a space for everybody. So it's also like I have like another interest and skill, which is like giving massage. So I was like, how can I just kind of like combine this offering as like kneading bread, but also kneading people and working on them as a healing process. And then I got into like this very interesting another layer of the work in the public, that how actually touching people in different cultures can be like super like political, or like about like class and sexism and all racism and everything that we talk about. So it got like to another direction, which, you know, it's long story that how I got different feedback here in America, but then I went to Europe and to the Asia with the work that I actually touched people and gave them massage. And in return, I was just getting back like a memory of bread from them. So it was also like this kind of mutual thing. So started from there, and then after I got into other natural places like land and water and plants, which that's all the projects that I'm doing these days that we can talk about it later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. Those were fantastic and very thorough and deeply meaningful answers. And actually, Bahar, that's a really excellent segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is how, especially as we're speaking as part of a panel on public art as Asian American artists. I would love to know how your identity and your experiences as AAPI inform your public art practices. Bahar, if you want to start.
I think I just a little bit talked about it, but also something that I think a lot as my identity after all these years that I've been seeking for my, what is that moment that I can define it, and it's just as much as like you really want to define your identity, you can't. And now I know that it's very fluid and it's not like one identity. And I'm trying to practice around it to how the work also can be more fluid and in what form. What's the statics of the fluidity actually, and what is for everybody and how we can just share that identity. But also I realize that every time that I want to talk about myself, I talk about climate. And every time that I want to understand someone, it's also I want to know what climate they come from. So it's very important for me that, like for example, Iran has got like a very diverse climate. So we exactly know that people that they come from the north of the country, they are closer to Caspian Sea, and they have like a different really identity and characteristic than like people that they come from the more arid areas in the center, and then again like in the south. So the way that I always dealt with the dry mountains and cliffs and how to go like every day with my father and go to the mountain. And then when I came here, and the first time I remember that my cousin who lives in Boston said, we go to hiking. I was like so excited. And then we went to this very like a foresty green place that it was like one hill right there. And then we were like, oh, that is mountain, that is hiking. So then I realized more and more. And then later when I came to New York, I'm surrounded with water, and I grew up with somewhere that water is very sacred because it's limited water. So I think my identity is very much tied to climate, and yeah, that's how I navigate myself and others in these categories.
Do you mind repeating that question? I vaguely remember.
Yeah. So how do you think your identity and experiences, particularly as AAPI, inform your work and your public art practice?
Oh, okay. I mean, that's literally all I do, I feel like, because I play such a sort of specific like Chinese instrument. But I think it also, I mean, while you're saying that question, I also think of what Amanda said, sort of chasing curiosity and fun has been a big part of also this new direction I'm taking with the Guzheng, because a lot of my education was with this teacher in Flushing who had opened up a shop, had this shop selling these instruments and also teaching them, and I was sort of at the time trying to escape piano and was like, let me pick the most intimidating looking instrument that is also gigantic. It is taller, or it's longer than I am even tall, so it's a very big instrument. But as I've revisited the instrument and the history and sort of the cultural context of it, as I've been on my like queer journey as well, it's been really interesting to dive deeper into the histories and the stories that are part of these songs, because every song that is sort of played has a story to it too. And there are these incredible stories that I learn now, especially this one song that I love called The Butterfly Lovers, in English, but in Mandarin it is called Liangshan Bo Yu Zuing Tai, which is the name of two characters of the song or the story. And it's this wonderful legend from like many, many, many hundreds of years ago. So it is a very old tale too. And it's very surprising to me sort of being instilled with Western history and social, cultural ideas, that something this traditional is also very queer. And it makes sense to me. And so in a lot of the things and projects that I do now, it's sort of chasing that voice inside of me that is like, if there is this one example of this beautiful, expansive world, what else exists out there? And I look to a lot of Afrofuturist writers, also to a lot of amazing people in our history, in our lineage of queerness, who talk about touching your sort of inner voice that has been taught to be ignored by capitalism, by white supremacy, by the world that we live in currently that is constantly saying those voices don't matter, because they haven't been written about, because they are not in textbooks, and to learn to lean into that voice. So although I don't have all the words maybe, or don't know how to explain it in academia or whatever, in ways that like we've been taught to speak, I'm trying to get back in touch with that and just sort of chase that feeling. So, and I think that's really incredible also because so many things draw me to this instrument, to this practice, to sharing music and history and all of the things that I don't even know the answer to with people around me, has been really incredible. And I just try to keep touching base with that feeling because I think it is probably the most anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacy sort of thing that I could do, and just, yeah, find the joy in sharing that.
I mean, just echoing what Clay and Bahar have said, so much of my Thai and Indonesian identity infuses into my work, sometimes in ways that I don't even realize until it's sort of like become this manifestation. But I guess I would say that my work focuses so deeply on belonging because it was something that I rarely felt as a child growing up in the American South. I grew up in this little town, pretty homogenous. I was often the only Asian kid, so either invisible or the butt of the jokes, or just like this odd bird. And you know, I'm also a mixed Asian. I'm Thai and Indonesian, and it's an interesting sort of place to be. You're sort of adrift between communities because you're sort of like not Thai enough, not Indonesian enough, not American enough, and you sort of have to code switch and navigate through these worlds. So my experience was very much caught in between worlds, and I think sometimes we build the worlds that we wish we had, or we build the worlds that, you know, we want to give to our younger selves, and sort of like through creating these worlds with others, we start to heal ourselves a bit. So much of my work is sort of like built on stories, built in community with others, to try to, you know, create this space for all of us to kind of come together and connect and sort of lay down all the stuff that actually doesn't really matter and to see each other as very deeply human.
Your experiences, Amanda, really resonate with me. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of cultural inheritance, and thinking, for me, I had grown up kind of practicing these like ancestral rituals, and growing up in this like super white suburban town, it was really jarring, and it was really like, it was kind of like a weird experience that I wasn't able to really, like I feel like I'm still kind of unlearning even like feelings of shame around that, and feelings of displacement. You know, even things like food, like right now there's this like popularity of kimchi, for example. But back then it was like something that was like kind of like I felt like embarrassed of, or made to feel embarrassed of. And so in my practice, I've been thinking about how I can sort of readapt, and because a lot of these rituals are passed down in my family through a matriarchal process, and kind of with like the passing of my grandma, and thinking about like what it means to be passed on something and passed on a tradition, and how to make it sort of my own. And I've been thinking a lot about how a lot of these rituals, though they are centered traditionally on family lineage, how family lineage can be kind of expanded to think more about community, and how they can be kind of readapted to create a collective experience. So for example, Dreams is based on a very specific cultural tradition where you can kind of purchase someone's dream. Usually it's positive dreams, like dreams that have a lot to do with fertility and wealth. And I was able to explore that throughout, it started during the lockdown, and it was sort of this opportunity for me to kind of receive and offer care with just loved ones and people within our communities. And Dreams was kind of like a fun and light way to kind of also touch on a really deeply, collectively traumatic and scary experience. There was a lot of really bonkers, absurd dreams, a lot of really intense dreams, and it just kind of made me rethink about how a lot of these traditions that seem so Korean or seem so specifically, tied to a specific nationality can actually be broadened out and speak to a variety of AAPI, specifically communities. And so that's sort of something that I'm still figuring out.
So it's a great question. I think about, I think we often live in this kind of duality and code switch and all of this, but I do think that as someone who grew up working class, my parents are garment workers, grew up in Sunset Park. I grew up in a very diverse community, Latinx and Chinese and Dominican, Afro-Caribbean, and so it was really rich in diversity. And so when I talk about my Asian American identity, obviously we can't escape that. But for me, because I was always around Asians, for me, class was a much more defining factor in identity for me. Because my whole life, you look at me, you don't know what class, you don't know where I'm from, right? And so going to, NYU, and then, later on, getting my MFA, people would assume I come from a certain place, and I don't. And then having to further explain, the burden I felt was often on me. I've actually just found out more recently, a lot of my work is now more political and personal. And I found out very recently that I had a great-grandfather that actually came to the US in the 1800s to Nevada to work, right? And then my grandfather was a paper son, right? And so we all, I think in this community, don't have to really go into it too much. We all know what the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act is and what that did for many of our ancestors who couldn't stay and build roots here because literally their communities were literally being bombed and firebombed or burned down, right, on the West Coast. And so I had many iterations of my family here. And it was kind of painful to find, very much as a full-on adult, find out that I had 4 generations of my family here very recently, and uncovering my grandfather's archives. Some of my grandfather's archives are actually at the Museum of City of New York because he was a co-founder of the Chinese Hand Laundry Alliance of New York, which was a very left communist, which I like to, we have to show that because I think there's often this Asians, Chinese are complacent and we're quiet, we don't speak out, we're victims, but actually every single person I know in my family and in my community is a fighter, is an organizer, is an agent of change. My mother is a garment worker leader, she became a leader of an organization. My grandfather, who had just found out 10 years ago, was a co-founder of a labor group, and was a photographer, an amateur photographer. And so these kind of stories, these underrepresented stories that I continue to struggle to try to tease out from my own parents. They don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about my grandfather and his history because it's very complicated. The McCarthy era really targeted a lot of the folks during the Cold War in the 50s, and so a lot of that stuff. So there's that piece of it. I think the class element is really important because in Chinatown, in Sunset Park, and in Manhattan, the folks who are often displacing us, working class people like my parents, are actually either second, third, fourth gen. I mean, some of them are coming back and trying to give back in a very meaningful way, but others are opening up businesses that people like my mom and dad can't afford, who are on fixed incomes. Or capital from overseas of people who look like me, but they actually don't have my interest in mind at all. They're only there to extract and sort of basically develop, right? Basically displace folks, and then once they can get rid of all these long-time tenants, whether they live in tenement buildings or rent-stabilized apartments, then they can build a high-rise, right? They can bulldoze it. And so anyway, all that to say that has been really resonant with me. And then the last thing around identity is I think that the flip side is that we need to use right now, this kind of white ascension of the Asians, like the perceived, I'm saying, right? If you think about it, Asians are still, we have the biggest income gap in the country. There's still the biggest disparity around income and wealth. But the perception is we're white ascending. The perception is we're the model minority. But we're also the yellow peril, right? So it's both of those things. And so my work has been looking at interviewing, actually A4 really supported a projection project I did in Flushing, where I interviewed a lot of Asian Americans who were maybe first generation to fourth generation. And they talked about their stories and how they're seen, perceived during COVID, and in the past, all of that. And so their stories were actually projected on a building, actually a building that everyone hates because it's a new development in Flushing, like 2 years ago, which was really, really great. But the other thing I have to say is the burden also for me, I feel like as Asian Americans, we also have to use our privilege in a way. And what I mean by that is speak truth to power. So all these injustices that are happening to our Black and brown communities, we have to speak out, right? We have to so this new jail that they're trying to build in Chinatown, it's gonna be the biggest jail in the world, the tallest jail in Chinatown, in the world rather, that's being built in Chinatown. And we know cages, no such thing as human cages. So how do we use our voice in a way to build true solidarity? So when I look at movements like, the Black Panther Party, or what Emory Douglas did with his public art. And you look at Tamia Rai, who is a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, but also all the murals she did in the 70s with Black and brown folks and Asian folks in Chinatown and Lower East Side. Like, that's the kind of, those are my heroes and sheroes that I look to. And when we think about art and how to build solidarity amongst folks of color, I think that's really important. And art and culture has so much, the power to be a catalyst for that, for us to reimagine a new kind of world that we want to live in. Art and culture has that power for us to be able to do that. So sorry.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. So powerfully stated. I just wanted to do a quick time check. How are we doing? Okay, so that's like 20 minutes. Okay, cool. We'll keep trucking along then. Thank you, Betty. I feel like that would flow really nicely into this next point I wanted to discuss, which is this through line that I've identified, and I think all of the panelists' works, is this commitment to creating public art that tries or looks toward creating social change and engaging with community and fostering something new. And Betty, I think you spoke so eloquently to this already, but I would love to know, and if you could speak more to this, what makes art such a compelling tool to achieve those goals?
Yeah, I feel like I've been talking a lot. I'll just try to keep it brief. I'll just use the example again. I just finally got a CAB organizing Asian communities. I don't know why I had a brain fart, but there we go. Sorry about that. I think that, again, to use the example of our partnership, the Brigade, Chinatown Art Brigade's partnership with CAVS, Chinatown Tenants Union, I think what we sought to do was to really demystify the cultural production process, because I think that everyday folks who are, like my parents who are garment workers, or a lot of my friends whose parents are restaurant and garment workers, or in construction or home health care, they don't have time to engage with this art thing, right? And I think for me, at least, I come from a very old school traditional family where they had no idea what the hell I was doing, like they couldn't understand what I was pursuing, right? So there's that piece of it that I think that, it took me finally, my mom became an activist and herself a labor leader, basically labor organizer as a garment worker, to understand like what the films I was making with others and some of the cultural work I was doing was like full circle. It was really to honor her and to honor my father and to honor my ancestors, but not just blood ancestors. I mean, the folks that the work that I think other folks have mentioned, like, we are doing this work on the shoulders of so many people. It's a continuum. When people say innovation and new, we're continuing to do this work. Maybe there's new approaches through technology or new media, but folks have been doing this work for so long, and so how do we continue that legacy? And I felt so privileged to be able to do this work in the brigade with Tamiya Rai, who holds so much history with Basement Workshop and Godzilla, and a lot of the work she's been doing in organizing with other Asian Americans within the art and culture realm. But I also think that in working with tenants, monolingual speaking Chinese Chinatown tenants, when we first did our workshop, they basically, which is great, they tore apart our whole entire workshop curriculum. They're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is crazy. You're speaking another language. And so we really started from ground zero, and they were the ones that were like, wouldn't it be great if we could project these messages at night, because people are working so hard, 12, 14-hour days, like my parents did. So when they come out of the subway, they could see these messages. And then the organizers had a table, right? So people would see the messages, stop, because they were messages, stories of tenants. And then there was an organizer from CAV there, with a pamphlet, and it was an opportunity to talk to folks. And so we decided where we're going to end with projections, but throughout the process, we co-created what the workshops will look like. So we were going to do these walks, placekeeping walks, where people were pinpointing places of resilience and resistance, places that are still there, like Wing on Woe, 120 years, amazing, and places that unfortunately are not there anymore because of displacement. And then it led to mapping, community mapping, visions for our future. What do we want Chinatown to look like in 20, 30 years when there's an abundance of housing and everything that we fight for, but want to fight for in the future? And so those were the building blocks to these projections. So I would just say that it, re-envisioning with folks, like working in a very horizontal way to create the materials, the projection images, that I have carried with me to all my other individual projects, working with communities like in Flushing and in Sunset Park that I've done. So I think that's really key, is that the co-authorship and the accountability to the people that you're working with who are directly impacted by the issue. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found is really potent is that art has the power to kind of create moments of connection and experiences, and invite people into spaces where people are kind of like willing to suspend like their sort of normal social conventions and enter a space that is sort of more imagined. So one kind of example that happened in the last live performance I did at Risa's Gallery, there was a moment where one of the dancer choreographers that I worked with would remove the shoes off of like audience members and place it on her head and kind of crawl around. And it was this like sort of absurd and comedic gesture, but it kind of opened up this like, it opened up a kind of opportunity for people to like no longer feel like static observers, but like they were like now fully engaged and part of the performance. And that would be like, you can't like go out into the streets and like grab people's shoes and put it on your head. Like that would be like super alarming and illegal. But in an art space, you can do that, and it can create these kind of like ice-breaking kind of moments that people kind of remember. And I think those are the sort of things that I really carry with when I think about live performance. How can I create experiences that are memorable for people and that people can kind of feel like they were part of something rather than they just kind of like watch this really cool thing happen in front of them?
So I think the power of art to sort of fuel movements is that it helps us reclaim. It helps us reclaim space, it helps us reclaim narratives. And, very much as Betty beautifully articulated, art is a catalyst. It moves us to action because it makes us feel something very deeply. And with public art, it's so flexible. It can manifest in so many different ways. It can be sort of like displayed in 2D across an entire city. Everywhere you go, you see it. You're reminded that, I should care about this if maybe you weren't caring about it before. For example, if you're, rebuking anti-Asian hate. For sort of a broader audience, it's like, oh, something is happening to my community members that I should care about. But for folks who, experience this on a daily basis, it is sort of like a solve for our anguish and our trauma. It reminds us how we can find hope in each other. But, it can also sort of like take the shape of a sculpture or performance art or a ritual where, we are in this guided experience together where, for example, I invited folks to participate in a ritual that's called Loikotong. It's kind of a renewal ritual where you sort of let go of the past year's grief, trauma, pain, anything that you want to unburden. And you float this vessel onto a body of water, and it's almost an embodied experience, as if your pain leaves you as you watch this vessel float away. And I was inviting folks from all different backgrounds to participate in this ritual with me, and just to see all of these vessels in the water sort of bobbing against each other, with all of these messages of the things that we had lost over the past couple of years, was just this beautiful moment of, this is what our communities care about. People wrote things that they lost, like my dad, which was heartbreaking, or faith in our institutions, a sense of self, a sense of being carefree and young. And I think public art, because it's very public nature, it allows both folks who are participating in the work and folks who are just observing to have a transformative experience, and it allows access in many different layers. Sometimes if you see the work and you're sort of like arrested by it, it's just something that's beautiful, that sort of like moves you at an emotional level, and maybe that's all that you get out of it. But sometimes artists are inviting folks to come into a space with a specific intention, and that is such a beautiful way to get deeper with folks. So a combination of sort of place-making and moment-making is, I think, what allows public art to just be so potent and powerful.
Yeah, I think public art is also like everyone is saying. I mean, I don't even know if I have anything to add. Like, y'all have said the thing. It's also a really great opportunity to bring fun and like curiosity. You really get to play with stuff that you don't really get to if it's in an academic setting. Like everyone has been saying, there's that suspending of disbelief. And yeah, I think about coming from a very traditional like guzheng sort of repertoire experience, learning all these folk songs, and teachers sort of being like, as a musician, you have to play it this certain way, or it's supposed to evoke certain things. But she also was like, well, within folk music, and specifically Chinese folk music, you can also feel the music, allow it to breathe, as opposed to, I think, Western music, where I hated the idea of having to play it exactly like the masters played it. But I also think about when I started exploring it with a lot of collaborators, and almost all of my performances have been with other community folks, mostly queer Asian Americans, and sort of queering the idea of all these traditions that we have been taught to hold firm in our identities or our practices. And something that comes to mind is this performance I did in January 2020 with Reign of Dynasty, who's this incredible drag queen. And we sort of took this old song that I play a lot called Gaoshan Liu Shui, which is this translated as high mountain flowing water. And it's a poem, I suppose, that was also turned into a song about these two vaguely hinted at homosexual men who were sort of going through the mountains and observing the landscape and each other. And we mixed it with a pop song called Dog Days Are Over, because it was the year of the rat and the new cycle of the 12-year zodiac cycle. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to do that until I had felt the freedom to to explore that through sort of this art practice of being curious and allowing myself to explore beyond the confines of what I was taught to do. And I feel like with art, it's really incredible to have that space to be curious and playful. And I feel like everyone is just saying incredible things, and so.
Yeah, the same. I'm just like, can I just sit and just listen and not to say anything? I don't know. But a lot of things that is just needs time to digest, and thank you, everybody. I think what I like to emphasize here as for myself, for the last 10 years, because I'm a painter and I'm a maker, so most of the time I'm in the studio, and and particularly in a capitalist context of being an artist, it's very easy to just fall into like this hierarchy that you are an artist and you're making something that is very precious, and you have something that, like average people, they don't have it. And that bothers me because it also goes back to the class and things that you all just dive into it. And so I'm really like trying to relearn myself and people and not underestimate every little unimportant small things that people do. And I realized that as an artist that I get either commission or I get invited to a biennial or do something, how can I really break through this and a little bit practice to be vulnerable, not to be on my high position, and not to feel about the final product, although they all demand to have like a final product. And I'm trying to see like how I can be creatively just do like another way that this is not about final products. So sometimes it's very hard because especially when I get invited to an exhibition, particularly the biennials, they want like a very specific thing that you have like as your project, you have plans for it, and you go there to just materialize it. And I have my own way to just trick them and say I have it, but then when I get there, I just really involve local people. And I've been lucky that they also, like I've been in the places that they've been very supportive too, and they understand the idea that it doesn't mean anything to me if I go with my art somewhere, even like if it's just either public art or anything else that is like a sculpture piece. People wants to come to it, so it's a placemaking in a way. Not every work and every context needs like a community engaged work. So I've learned that how to divide my work, like the time that I'm building my work, that can be my community engaged work. It doesn't matter like what is on the poster, that at the end, this is a community engaged work of public art. No, at the end it's a sculpture that is not even important for me anymore. But the way and the process that I go through it, and I involve the local people anywhere that I go, that's very important. And I think you folks also just were talking about like how some certain identities are always just being tied with like victimizing. Like for example, immigrants always have to be poor, always have to be sad, always have to just come in a very threatening way that they almost made it and they're happy that they're alive, and they have like a little things that they just happy with that. And that really, really like can make me miserable to feel like how in the media every second we hear from these migrant people that they just somehow found themselves here. And some of them, they get here because like they made it to America. And I'm just really trying to find a way that how we can depict or like find a way that what is integrity? Where that integrity and dignity that they have, how can we magnify on that? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What sounds like it? So I feel like I've been learning that from them, that what they want me. So I like to call myself facilitator and not just necessarily an artist. I like to go somewhere, melt into that community. Doesn't matter how big or how small, it can be like really like a family of 4 members, and then I just sit and just have tea with them. And believe me, sometimes it's just we don't even know each other's language, but I think I like to challenge myself to understand them with just being there, and then understand like what they want me to make. That happened like in Lahore in Pakistan, that it was really like based on this non-language, non-linear, non-binary way of making things. And it turned out that the city actually acquired the work as a permanent piece that was supposed to be just a art project for the biennial. So I think that power, as you said, like it's a power that you give to people, and then people, they feel like they have the authorship of that, and they feel like belonging. That's the ultimate goal for me, to make anything if I can.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I think we're running short on time, so I think I have time for one more question. And Lisa, do we have time for Q&A as well? Okay, got you. Okay, so I'll ask y'all one last question. And right now we're in like a very, I think, potent and historic time, particularly as public artists. You know, we're rethinking the meaning of monuments, what it means to create art in these public settings. So I would love to know what each of you thinks the role of public-facing art ought to be. Bahar, I know that's a loaded question to answer quickly.
Because it's very short. Yeah, it means a lot of things, but I think more and more thinking deeply, like what is the genuine way of being inclusive in the world that is the language and any architectural aspect of the city is about ableism, right? About like sexism, racism, binary again. Like I think like public art is a way that can show like what democratic way of being means in a very short.
Yeah, exactly that. And also, yeah, thinking about accessibility and connecting. I think as we've been talking about, like connecting with people who don't have access to the quote unquote art with a capital A, and engaging them where they're at and inviting them into that co-creation or conversation about how this can service them. Yeah.
Everything they said. But I think that public art is certainly an invitation, as Clay said, but also perhaps a frame or a portal through which we can, you know, revisit long-held memories or sort of like parse through our own experiences. And, you know, I think it's a powerful way that we can invite people to act on themselves and on the world.
Yeah, I think it also has the power to make visible like communities that have for a long time been erased or not really like given a spotlight, but also give them a platform and a space where they're kind of really like given a certain dignity, and like not just kind of like as a, you know, a caricature or just like as a stereotype, but to like really like give a certain like humanity and dignity. I think it can have that sort of power. Yeah.
Yeah, ditto what everyone said. Really, really, I was just listening. Like again, I just want to be a listener and observe. But what I'll add is that really thinking about public art in particular neighborhoods. I think we've been talking about, you know, when they are site-specific, whether it's, you know, placemaking or placekeeping project, to use those opportunities to really uplift voices, like you were talking about, uplift voices that are normally sort of invisible, well, I don't want to say invisible, but sort of stories that are undertold, or, you know, histories of people that are, you know, really hidden. And so I think that that is a real opportunity at this point, like to do it in a way where if we were to reimagine completely, we had like a open canvas, like to actually approach it from a grassroots up model. You know, like really, we don't have to do things the way they were, like turn it upside down. Why does it have to be that one artist, right, that gets commissioned? Like it should be from the ground up, coming from the community, doing it in a new kind of way, and setting an example that is very site-specific, space-specific, specific to that community, uplifting stories of people who are really deserve celebrating. So I think that's the opportunity we have, you know, if that, you know, like you said, at this moment, so.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm getting a little bit of a headache from nodding so much during this panel, just of so many fantastic talking points. And I love that this ended up with this cumulative response. So thank you all so much. And I would love to open it up to the audience. I think we can, do we have? Okay, I think we can have 2 Q&As if anyone has any questions in the audience. Oh, yeah, sure. Here.
I'm not sure.
Thank you all so much for sharing your practice and yourselves. I really loved hearing about how you use your practice to be connected. And so I'm wondering, in the community engagement process, the public art process, what challenges you face, and you know, how do you interact with a very large community, very large communities with intersectional identities, where perhaps sometimes you don't align, and interested about hearing how you work through those challenges.
Thank you for the question. I just can talk about like my own experience that in terms of like working with the communities, because I've worked with the communities that I don't know, not necessarily like the Asian American or anything that I belong to or like I know exactly, and I learned a lot from that. And although I particularly know that people of color and immigrants and you know, putting like power on global south is my frame, but it's not like a very particular community, so it can be very vast. And they and I think like my kind of like, maybe I can call it a strength to just work with them is I put myself completely as a learner. And at the beginning is very, very intimidating, because anything can happen that you might just not predict that. It's a very vulnerable space, but I think that's the trick. If you just really go all the way to that space that you say, I am vulnerable and I don't know anything, and I want you to just really teach me. And then the conversation starts and things just really happening in between, the real conversation.
Yeah, I love what Bahar is saying. I feel like because music is still, and sound is still a sort of newer practice for me, the challenges are still arising. But I have been approached sometimes with the question of like, why, like how do you open up your practice that is so specific, so niche to a larger audience? And to me, I'm like, I don't need to. You know, there are people who will understand what I'm doing and see it for what it is. And I'm going to continue to lean into that, because this is what I would have needed 6 years ago when I was still wondering about it. So a lot of my sort of reaction to when people are like open up your practice, make it more sort of universal or accessible to people who don't know about this specific practice. For me, there is a balance of like, or do explain and talk about the songs or translate them or try to show the music scores, which are in a completely different language, not Western music notations. But I also lean into it further, because I think that's also really special when you can just really trust the gut. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think the specificity of our stories is what makes them powerful, but there's also a seed of universality in our individual stories as well. You know, we can always sort of draw these bigger themes out, but I guess I'll just add that embracing of the tension is important. You know, just because there is tension doesn't mean it's not going well. It actually is going great because it is an invitation to sort of get at the heart of, you know, what needs to be addressed within specific communities, or, you know, as an outsider, you know, working with a specific community, or, you know, as a member of your own, where there are perhaps issues of racism, colorism, you know, there is to kind of create space for these conversations and create safety is what I certainly try to foster in the process, because I think things like rituals are such a powerful way to kind of invite people with intention to a space to be vulnerable together and to know that, you know, whatever happens in this space, we're not trying to shame anyone. We're not trying to make anyone feel inferior or wrong. It is sort of like a space to come to some kind of shared understanding. And, you know, almost every time I've held these rituals where we kind of delve into our stories and we share from a very deep place of vulnerability, everyone cries. And then it's like this beautiful cathartic moment that we have together, and then you know, it's sort of like something has been unlocked for all of us, and then it's an insight to then take the next step in the process of creating the work.
I think, yeah, for me, one of the challenges comes from, I guess, like the pressure of when I'm like entrusted with someone else's or another community's narrative or story, and being able to kind of feel like I can do it justice. So like, for example, I have a sort of ongoing project taking place at the DMZ, so the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And I was working with the local village there that's kind of entrusted with taking care of that land. And one of the things that kept coming up was, okay, so if you're going to film here and you're going to do like a project here, please make sure that you don't contribute to this like sensationalized idea of what the media depicts it as, this like scary, like place of geopolitical tension. But actually there's a lot of effort and care that is being put into, and a lot of labor towards taking care of that land and reviving it as this ecological sanctuary, and they take a lot of pride in the work that they have created. It like houses thousands of endangered animal and plant species. And so I think my approach is always kind of echoing what was said, taking on like a learning perspective and really not kind of coming in with my own biases and my own understandings, but really trying to understand like what is vital for them. And what that means to kind of honor their stories and what's important to them, so that it doesn't feel in a way like exploitative or transactional, but like that it actually can contribute something. Yeah.
So echoing what everyone said, I'll just kind of add that in the cultural organizing work that I do, you know, with communities, it's really letting go. I think a lot of folks have said letting go of your own predetermination of what the product, whatever, I don't mean product, but the end result of that should be. And it's really about immersing yourself in the process of maybe unlearning things that you thought, or just kind of really listening and leaning in. And I think a really big learning moment for me and a challenge was actually doing these during COVID, you know, in 2021, capturing stories of people. A4, you know, was really supportive of this. We did these projections, and I see one person here whose story was projected. And we did these events, and one thing that I was really kind of, you know, a lot of my work often people say it's too didactic, and I actually take that as a compliment. But I've been trying to like wrestle with that. But and again, you know, one question that I ask folks is like, what makes you feel safe? What does community safety mean to you? So there's questions about, you know, your own Asian American identity. At this moment, you know, safety, what does that look like? And then kind of infusing questions or possibilities around abolition. What could that look like, right? And not relying on a police state and not relying on prisons and all of this. And there were people who were straight up, talking about, we really need cops right now because of what's happening to Asian Americans. And that's fair. That's like my parents' reality growing up and, being in New York in the 70s and 80s. Like, I get that, right? But at the same time, if you try to, sort of talk to them in a way that is not meeting folks where they're at, then it comes off as, preachy, right? And so for me, it was really about hearing their stories and remembering that, cultural organizing is also transformative organizing, and it's about uplifting each other. And I think that in this way, the storytelling and engaging with folks and capturing people's stories and not editing people's, responses that I didn't politically agree with out was really important, because that's when you have those conversations and you can wrestle with that, right? Because I'm definitely coming from a certain perspective, but others aren't, and that's exactly why we have to confront it and not just to censor it or cut it out, but confront it head on and use that as an opportunity to talk about, well, are they really there to keep us safe, Are there other ways we can look out for each other and care for each other, and other kinds of caring communities that can emerge out of this? So, that's kind of just echoing the learning piece is really important, I think.
Okay, yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Big hand for everyone here. So thank you all, and thanks to our hosts. If you want, we'll keep the slideshow going, so you can scan the QR codes to follow each artist on Instagram and follow their work. Sign up for the A4 newsletter so you can hear more about our programs, and join us for some snacks and ask questions directly to the artists, since we didn't have time. So thank you all again for coming. Have a great night.